This week on the Unamplified Podcast. Hello, Africa. Hello, people. Welcome to another episode of the Unamplified Podcast. My name is Cynthia Mbamalu, your host, and as always, I have our amazing co-host,
Andrea, the dramatic one.
Yes, Andrea. Man, it's 2024.
Honestly,
wow,
it's like
wow.
we close our eyes and open up what 2024 is looking
Exactly.
at us.
Happy New Year. The New Year
Happy
vibes.
New Year.
I'm still trying to catch up with the whole sense of, this is a new year. But I'm hoping that after a while, I'll get used to saying 2024. I'm still in the 2023 mode.
I was actually tired of 2023 already. I just had to get over with it.
I'm telling you, it's good to be back, and I'm happy I'm happy we're all alive and we're all healthy as we begin the new year. And today we have two amazing guests, two powerful young men in Africa, leading things. I'll begin. This one is I call him my patron, so I'll leave him. But he's a patron of the Unamplified Podcast family. I'll begin with my senior colleague at the bar. Yeah, you know, for lawyers, we have seniority at the bar. You cannot see your senior and be talking to them anyhow. So when someone is called to bar before you, you just have to give them the respect because it's not easy.
Is there a name you call them, senior?
It's just my senior learned colleague.
Oh.
I'll try not to blush.
Please don't blush. But it's good to have you, Barrister Chuang Gang. I shouldn't have added the Barrister Chuang Gang.
Yes.
Welcome. Chuang Gang is an election expert, a human rights activist, and is a lawyer. I know he does a lot around elections, but he's also someone that is interested in a lot of public interest kind of litigation and even issues around human rights. It's really a pleasure to host you.
It's a pleasure having me on your set.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
This one, he's been here before, more than once.
Third time.
This is the third time, right? And he has his own fan base, though. Like, anytime we post his podcast, I'll be an episode with him on, you will just see his fans in the comment section tripping for him. I'm like, he's stealing the show from you. Ibrahim Farouk. I call him Ibrahim of Africa, the one and only Ibrahim Farouk. Ibrahim is a movement builder. This is one guy I know that has traveled this continent more than a lot of us. He does a lot of work in Africa, and he also leads the Africa division in Yaga Africa. He's been part of several elections last year that happened within the continent. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Cynthia. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Chuang, Andrea.
Happy New Year. Welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Yes. I'm glad to have you on the show today. And we were saying, how do we start the year? And we decided that we need to pick out like key moments or key events from the last year. And you know me now. Election will always be a key event from last year. And so we'll be talking about elections that happened within the continent.
Yeah.
Last year, we had the Nigeria general elections, which was big because this is probably the biggest elections in sub-Saharan Africa, actually.
Yeah.
If you think about our population, Nigeria has approximately 94 million registered voters, and that is huge. But we also had elections in Sierra Leone. We had parliamentary elections in Guinea-Bissau. We had elections in Liberia. And then we had, at the end of the year, we had elections in DRC. And so today, we'll be looking at the Nigeria elections, but from the courts, especially as it relates to the decisions of the courts with the presidential elections petition process, and then also the Liberia elections. And we have these two erudite young scholars. Why did you emphasize the young?
We're young.
From the very beginning, he wants to be referred to as a young man. It's good.
Talk to him. Why is he going young?
We're young.
Yes, we are young. We're still very young.
Still very young, yes.
Yes, we thank God for youth. All right, let's jump right into it, right? I'll change it a bit. Let me just ask generally. From last year, for those of us who followed the decisions of the court, even Andrea, I'm sure you followed conversations online.
Yes.
I'll just hear your general thoughts around it, the decisions of the court, especially with respect to the presidential elections petition. And I'll begin with Chuang here.
Thank you for the privilege to be here.
Thoughts.
And thank you and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
The contest we have right now is a contest for the soul of Nigeria's democracy, where you have trust issues with the institutions. First starting with INEC, and people have perception as to what transpired at the polling unit. They were encouraged to come and vote. They were encouraged to get their PVCs. And the perception of the populace, most especially young Nigerians, was that they did the right thing and exercised their civic duties.
Yes.
But they had a problem with the process, and they had hoped that the judiciary will look into the process and whatever the outcome of the judgment, but give them answers to the questions they had after the election. And most of them were told to come out because technology would be the game changer.
Yes.
The beavers would be used, that in real time results be transmitted to the IREF, and they could check those results in real time. And what now happened was that the court had a different view from that held by the young populace. And also there's a limit to which I can say some things, not to criticize the judiciary. But also, truth be told, is that we have a problem in a system where justice is truncated at the altar of technicalities. That appears to be the general perception. We had a situation where people didn't even understand what the judgment meant, where they were in the polling unit. The results that they have on their phones, because most of them snap the results, are different from the one on the IREF. And they were hoping that the court will look into these discrepancies and resolve those anomalies. But the court dashed their hope. So those are some of the issues that, but I'm sure as we discuss, we'll go into the details as to the judgment and what transpired.
Yeah, I know you said something around citizens, especially young people. They really had high expectations in the elections.
Yes.
And for some of them, they had lots of questions after the elections, and they were hoping that the judgment would answer some of those questions.
Exactly.
But it seems like they were left without answers. And I'll come straight to Ibrahim. You also followed the decision. I think you watched the at least for the tribunal. I don't know if you followed the Supreme Court. Was the Supreme Court aired live?
Yes.
Yes, it was too. So what was your general thoughts around the whole process?
I think first of all to say it's interesting. I think this is the first time we saw the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal and Supreme Court televise the proceedings live, and I suspect, and all day, well into the night. I suspect that was a measure to also temper some of the emotions that were flying, so that everyone could follow the proceedings live, and there wouldn't be any hint of any sort of foul play that went on with the judgment. But I think Chuang also made the point. We saw how young Nigerians were trending hashtags on social media and focusing on what the outcome from the courts were going to be. I think what is important, most especially, is for us, especially as young Nigerians. Yeah. And I'm saying young because we're young people, and young people that are watching us.
Yes.
We also need to invest a lot in understanding our political processes, our judicial processes, and how these affect us. It's one thing to go and vote on election day and expect that the candidates who won in your polling unit, for instance, would win. And of course, there are times when there are some malpractices that happen that are corrected by the court. But the grand scheme of things, where we have over 176,000 polling units, and when some candidates feel aggrieved and go to court, there's also the burden of proof sometimes that candidates need to bring to the courts. I'm sure both of you will say justice is blind. So you almost have the burden of proof to show the evidence that malpractice has taken place and your mandate has been stolen. I say that in quotes.
Yeah.
And the court would now restore that mandate to you. But I think it's there are positives that we can take from this. Moving forward, we would also focus on judicial processes even before the elections. So that maybe that reduces some of those court processes in the post-election period.
Yeah. You said something around what we need to start doing even ahead of the next election, focusing even understanding the roles the courts are increasingly playing. Then you said things were trending online. I know hashtag eyes on the judiciary was trending for a long period of time. I want to bring Andrea quickly before I move back to Chuang. As a younger Nigerian, I'm using younger now because I call you Gen Z, even though you don't want to be called Gen Z. What did you think about the whole process?
Okay, so for me personally, this was my first time voting.
Okay.
And I had a lot of friends too who...
Congratulations, I'll say.
Thank you. But I was supposed to have started voting since. It's not as if, so I'm not Gen Z. And I had a lot of friends too who I had to encourage, and we had to go together to vote, get our voter's card, make sure we got it, and then went to vote as well. And we were really hopeful. And like you said, our hopes were dashed. But when I went to vote, I made sure that my friends and I, we went to a few polling units. We checked. We waited for them to count. The rain even met us there. We still waited for them to count the votes. We heard the results before we left, and we were very hopeful. But our polling units is not the entire country. So when the results came out, we were a bit confused, but then we had to accept it. And then when they said they were going to court, we did not really have a lot of faith in it. So
why did you have faith?
Because I think in the history of presidential tribunals, whoever takes the case to court hardly wins at the end of the day. And so we just had to say, okay, fine. Let's just hope that this president or the incoming government would show us love, as they say. So that was it, honestly.
Okay. It almost seemed like there is very little faith in the judiciary from your perspective.
Yes, from the perspective of a lot of young people.
A lot of young people. Okay, I'll now come to Chuang. Now, what are the grounds to challenge an election in court? And especially for the presidential election, what were the grounds that the petitioners relied on to challenge the elections?
In a narrow sense, the grounds are three in a narrow sense, but some will say four. One is to say that at the time of the election, in this case, that Tinubu was not qualified to contest the election. Now, when you're coming under this ground, you're coming under the constitutional provision. You are saying that the qualification itemized on the constitution, say for instance, age, say for instance, issue of double citizenship, say for instance, issue of allegiance, having allegiance to another country. Say for instance, issue of you have been convicted of corruption or misappropriation, all those qualifications. So if a candidate, that was what Labour said and that's what PDP said, is to say that at the time of the election, that Tinubu and APC were not qualified to contest that election. Now, what will normally happen in this case, you are going to say that whatever vote, you are not contesting the issue that transpired, the polling unit or non-compliance. You are trying to say that if the court finds that these people were not qualified or that this person was not qualified, what will happen is that those votes are deemed as wasted votes and that the vote should be given to the next person. So that was the contest. And we are aware that there was issue of saying that there was a forfeiture in US, and the question was whether that forfeiture amounted to conviction. And the tribunal was of the view that that did not amount to conviction. There was issue of double nomination by Shettima to say that at the time his name was submitted to INEC, he was already nominated as a Senate candidate representing Borno State. And that the court also said that no, it's a pre-election matter, issues of nomination and sponsorship are pre-election matters. And as such that it was the presidential court was not the proper forum to bring those kind of issues. So if you look at our legal framework in respect of qualification, the court proceeded to say that, see, apart from the issues itemized in the Constitution, you cannot bring any disqualifying factor against an elected candidate except those ones itemized by the Constitution.
Okay.
But from in summary, in respect of ground one, most of the issues that has to do with political party membership are all pre-election issues. That's what happened in ground one. Okay. Then the second ground is you are saying that that the election is marred. You are saying there was election, but you are saying that the election is marred by non-compliance with the Electoral Act or corrupt practices. So either it comes with corrupt practices, it can stand on its own, or it can come for non-compliance. But what usually happens in practice is that lawyers will bring the ground of non-compliance and corrupt practices. When you come for non-compliance, you are simply saying that on the face of the document, when you look at the election that was handled by INEC, that they did not comply with certain provisions of the Electoral Act while conducting the election. And that as such, the court should annul those elections, or that vote in polling unit should be discountenanced because those votes were given or were attributed to a candidate
based on
in breach of the Electoral Act. Then, in that case, you need to prove that. But for the issues of corrupt practices, what you are doing is you are talking about fraud. Let's say mutilation of election results. You are talking about mutilation at collation. So you are talking about fraud. And the standard of proof in corrupt practices is to say that you must prove beyond reasonable doubt. Wow. So the standard is not on probabilities. Where you're coming,
that is a tougher.
It's a tougher standard. And so if I say that these people, when they change, like say the allegations, they remain allegations in Rivers, where people allege that the result sheet were changed, the standard of proof is high in that kind of situation. So what the court have said in a nutshell is to say that one, if you are proving non-compliance, you must prove the non-compliance polling unit by polling unit. We have over 100 and something thousand polling units, about 170 something thousand. Now, take for example Labour. Labour challenged 18,000 polling units, over 18,000 polling units. And the court is saying that in their pleadings, both Labour and PDP, they pleaded generally, is to say, don't return Tinubu because in over 18,000 polling units, there was no compliance. Now, they did a spreadsheet. But what the court said, no, that you must plead that polling unit by polling unit. What that means, when you are writing the petition, you must say, in polling unit, so at Damaturu, you plead. You must do that up to 18,000 times in your petition. It will mean you have one paragraph for each polling unit. Now, the proof also has to be polling unit by polling unit. That means you must bring the election result sheet for 18,000 polling units. But if you were to bring the result sheet, that is not sufficient. The attempt was made, if you remember during the amendment, to say that because of the heavy standard of proof, let's whittle it down. If you tender documents to say they are certified true copy, that should be sufficient proof of non-compliance. Is that not so? The court now say in a Yotala and INEC that no, that what you must do is you must bring the polling unit result for 18,000. then you must bring a witness to speak on behalf of
but
that
that's
polling
where
unit.
I had a little worry because there's the amendment to the act. That new section says if you do that is sufficient, you don't need oral evidence. So what really happened?
At the tribunal, APC argued in Oshun
Yes.
to say that the document they tendered from the beavers were sufficient proof they don't need to bring witnesses. And they relied on section 138
Yes, of the act.
That says once you bring document, those documents should be sufficient proof. The court said no, not to bore you with legal jargons. The court simply said you must bring the document, that's the polling unit result, together with a witness. Now the witness must be a witness who was at the polling unit.
Yes,
it cannot be a collation agent who supervised those polling units. Other than that, you could bring collation agent. No, it must be an agent of the party at the polling unit. Now, look at the practical scenario. What would have meant is that you have to bring 18,000 witnesses.
Honestly, there's a lot of...
When you bring 18,000 witnesses, you have to do 18,000 witness statement on oath. Because the tribunal says you must bring their witness statement on oath with the petition. So you must bring 18,000 witness statement on oath. Those 18,000 witnesses must now testify in respect of all the polling unit. Now, you have constitutionally 180 days to prosecute the election petition.
So that's almost...
It's impossible to now say that you will bring 80. How many pages will you have if you are to do a witness statement on oath? A witness statement on oath is per page.
Well, let's move straight to the next ground because I know
now.
Well, yeah.
The other ground is to say that that the person that was returned did not obtain the majority of lawful vote cast. Is an issue of computation. You are saying that by computation, if you look at the election and you look at the result, when you do a proper computation, you will discover that the petitioner, I'm just saying hypothetically, that the petitioner was the one that secured the majority of lawful vote cast. Because they have to not just vote cast, but it means lawful.
Yeah, lawful, yes.
Yes, that if you calculate the result sheet again from polling unit to collation unit, that you will discover that he or she obtained the majority. So those are the three grounds that you can now bring and sustain an election petition.
Yeah, and I know for this one, 25% in FCT was also one of the questions that the court answered or responded to.
You are right.
Yeah, and then the court had said that what is required is 25% into third, and FCT includes, it's part of the two-third. FCT cannot be treated
as a separate state.
As a separate state. Yeah, it has to go together. But I mean, I wanted to break this down because we need to also understand that perhaps we need to start having conversations to ensure that cases don't get to court, because to prove a case in court, especially elections related matters, for presidential, maybe for state assembly, that's a smaller scale, maybe
Small
easier,
yes.
or House of Reps, or maybe even Senate. But governorship, presidential, they are becoming actually presidential, very difficult to prove. And I want you to, because this has remained a major issue in our process, and a lot of citizens lost their hope, especially after the court case, after the decision from the Supreme Court on the presidential petition. But I want to go straight to Liberia, because while we were complaining and losing our faith and hope in Nigeria, Liberia seemed to have been in a bit of a celebratory mood. And so I wanted to get that from Ibrahim. You were in Liberia. What was the thing that stood out for you? And if you were to pick lessons from Liberia for Nigeria, what would they be?
Yeah, so 2023 was great because we had Nigerian elections, we had Sierra Leone elections, we had Liberian elections, and all of them came with their own differences and lessons that we can learn. But I think just to give a bit of context, is that even in terms of size of the populations of these countries, were very different. Liberia had a population of about 5.5 million, but a voting population of about 2.4 million. which can be almost the size of one state
in
Nigeria.
Maybe
so small.
But regardless, there's so many lessons that we can learn. One of the things we saw, for instance, was the ballot papers that were used had the names, pictures, and party logos of all the candidates. And I think
That's
that
good.
goes a long way
Yes.
in ensuring that citizens are able to identify who they want to vote for. In Nigerian elections, for instance, you just see the party logo or the party symbol. So it's almost as if you're voting just for the political party and not for the individual. And we heard those conversations around, oh, I'm voting for this candidate, but I don't support this political party. I think if we can adopt that as part of our electoral reforms, it would go a long way in ensuring that citizens' choices are respected and are clearly marked. But as I was listening to Chuang, another thing that stood out for me especially was to see how the process in Liberia was so meticulous.
Yes.
To ensure that there was fidelity to the election law.
Yeah.
Down to the point where we were counting and sorting at one of the polling units, and the law says you must count them in stacks of 50. So at the polling unit, the presiding officer count 1, 2, 3 up to 50 and put them in one stack. Up to 50 and put them in one stack. Not being a Liberian, you could not understand. You just say, count this thing, let's be going. But you could see how they stuck to the process so much. Even when we went to the tallying center or the collation center, it is set up with projectors and with printers, and they bring the results from every polling unit. And the result is shown to all the party agents, all the observers, and then it is photocopied and everyone is given a copy. And then it is now entered into the electronic system in the full view of everyone. And if there are any discrepancies with what is on the polling unit result and what is being entered on the system, you can challenge them. And if there are any polling unit results, but mind you, there are about 5,000 and something polling units. So it's easier to do that compared to 176,000 polling units that my Nigerian brothers have. Because now I'm speaking as a Liberian.
Wow, you just jackpot on top this show now.
That's a Liberian. But we also saw high voter turnout. And as we investigate what are some of the reasons for this, a Liberian president has a 6-year tenure. Could it be that if you know that you have to wait 6 years to vote, it means that whenever you have the opportunity, you actually want to come out? Liberian Senate, the tenure is 9 years. So if you're a senator, you have 9 years in the Senate. Maybe citizens also understand that to vote a senator, I better get it right because it might take 9 years for me to vote
again.
To vote again. So we've seen some of those lessons, and I think when it comes to also training of election day staff to ensure that they understand the processes, follow them. So we're not going to court and talking about non-compliance or corrupt practices. We also need to build that sense of responsibility and patriotism among Nigerians, as this would definitely affect voter turnout for us. Our voter turnout figures have not been
we're still in 27%.
Yes.
Liberia, what was your turn?
About 70%.
Wow.
I think 76,
about 70, higher 70.
Yeah, higher
about
70,
76%. So we saw high voter turnout in the first round in October, as well as the second round in November. And the assumption was that because of the second round, you might see a bit more apathy. But we still saw high voter turnout for the election. So I think shout out to our brothers and sisters in Liberia who ensured that the elections, the presidential elections in 2023 were very commendable.
When you say turnouts, because that was one thing that I really was so proud of, that you're having over 75, I think about almost 76.8 or so, 77% turnout. So high turnout of voters. And, Liberia is still a developing country. Post-war, They are just how many years post 20 years post Civil War, because they celebrated 20 years in 2023. It's still really developing, and honestly, I went because we were also in Liberia. We could see that if you think about poverty level, they have high poverty rate, the same way we have in Nigeria. In fact, infrastructural development, Nigeria is more advanced than Liberia, and you didn't see citizens saying because we're poor we wouldn't vote. It seemed like the poverty was an incentive for them to want to vote. It seemed like their conditions, the challenges they had, became an incentive for them to want to participate. And that's the sense of patriotism Ibrahim is talking about. Like, it may not be perfect system, but just know that this election is the opportunity you have. If you have higher turnout, it's difficult to manipulate results. But I like what you talked about, the compliance to the rules. It could be, in fact, it's a slow system, but I think it works for them because they want to ensure everything counts. So the way they count, they are not in a hurry. On elections day, you left your polling when I was chatting with you.
At midnight.
Past midnight. And they started votes early, like 8 o'clock.
Yes, 8 o'clock.
So it's not like they started votes late. But the counting takes so much time because they count the way they count. And if an agent asks for a recount, they have to recount. And so midnight, you're still there, they're still counting, but they're not in a hurry because they want to get it right. And I think that is something we probably need to learn, how we train our personnel that we deploy and how we train our party agents. What did you think about the party agents there?
I was super impressed with the party agents. They were very patient. They were very courteous. You'd go into a polling unit and a party agent has his or her notepad and they are counting the number of voters that come in to vote. So if Chuan comes in, 1. If Andrea comes in, 2. Cynthia comes in.
I'm telling you.
That's a lot of patience.
The number of votes cast in that polling unit would tally with the number of voters who walked into that polling unit. I remember we were at one polling unit and one presidential candidate came in to vote. So he rushed in with his entourage and the agents were saying, no. Everybody has to give way for them to count to ensure that it's only one person that voted or 2 persons, the candidate and his wife. It was so meticulous. I was super impressed. But another thing that impressed me was they also allowed observers and polling agent staff or drivers, anyone who was on election duty to vote. You could vote especially for the presidential election because the country is an entire constituency for the presidential election. And if you are working within your senatorial constituency, even if you were not assigned to the polling unit where you registered, you could still vote as long as you were within that constituency.
Yes.
For us, our estimates are over 4 to 5 million who are on election duty. So that's about 4 to 5 million who do not vote. We said that the voting population of Liberia is about 2.4 million. So the population in Nigeria that works on election day, that is not able to vote either because you're observers or your INEC staff or your security or your journalists, is more than the entire voting population of a whole country. I think that moving forward, we also need to find ways to ensure that those who are on election duty, I know Chuang is a registered voter, but I'm not sure when last he voted because
he also works on
many
election
times he's working on elections. Cynthia, I can say the same for you and for me as well. It's very difficult to say you want to vote on election day because you're also deeply involved with election observation and those processes. We must also find ways that every Nigerian, even if you're working on election day, on election duty, you can exercise your franchise.
Yeah, and I thank you for bringing that because as we talk about electoral reform, this is something we need to consider because we need to understand it's a constitutional right and every citizen deserves to vote, whether you're worked on elections day or not. And we're hoping that early voting is considered in our electoral reform process this time around. Observers, ad hoc officials, you think about core members, young people, over thousands are deployed on elections day. They don't get to vote. Like Ibrahim said, we have millions who are not allowed or who do not get to vote because of their work. In Liberia, our drivers carrying us for observers, they will tell you, I need to vote. You have to wait for them to, because they say, my constitutional right, the way they take it very personal, right? I think that's something we can learn. I'm going straight to the question around trust. And this is about for every one of us. Maybe I'll begin with Andrea, because you talked about people losing faith in the elections, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to get from you, how can we rebuild trust, especially trust on the part of young people? How can we rebuild their trust in our elections to keep them engaged, especially as we plan towards the next general elections?
Okay, so I would say for young people, especially students, university students, and even secondary school students, you can start from the younger ones, and teach them that this is your constitutional rights. You have to carry it out. If you don't, nobody will. And then if anything goes wrong, you can't really count it against anyone because you did not exercise your constitutional right to vote. And so we have to teach them that patriotic spirit. Yeah. That it's your right. This is your country. This is you're a first citizen here. You can't be a first citizen anywhere else. This, especially those who were born here and all of that. And so they need to get that awareness that their right has to be exercised. It doesn't matter if, okay, the last time you voted, you were disappointed, your hopes were dashed. You have to keep trying. You have to keep pushing that and have faith. Yes, your faith might be dashed and, your heart broken, trust broken, and all of that.
Everything
broken, but you can't stop.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, this is your country. This is where you raise your children, your children's children. And so you're doing it not just for yourself, you're doing it for your future as well. So I think more awareness for the young people so that they can, in the next elections, they would definitely want to come out to vote. And also in a way that would attract them. A lot of young people are creative people. I would say that because I'm also in the creative industry. I would always want to impute that. And if you bring out events and outreaches that would pull them and teach them that this is your constitutional rights in a creative way, I'm sure that in 2027 would have a lot of young people coming out to vote.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very brilliant idea, because you talked about high school, secondary school students. A lot of them, people that are 15, 16, 14 now, will be turning 18 by the next electoral cycle.
Yeah.
So they are actually people we need to start catching young now, because they are going to be the new determinants of who gets elected in the next election. And I'm coming to Chuan. You've talked a lot around the grounds and the difficulties in even proving a case. And I'm just thinking, how, in the line of how we can rebuild trust, are there possible reforms that can be conducted either in the Electoral Act or even at the level of the Electoral Commission that can, rebuild trust in our process?
There are several steps to be taken. The first is with the electoral umpire. INEC should only promise what it can deliver.
Yes.
Promise what you can deliver.
Yes. INEC should promise Nigerians and most especially young people what they can deliver.
Yeah.
If you say that, we will, election result will be transmitted to the IRF.
Yes.
Don't come on election day and say, no, that's not the position.
Exactly.
Promise what you can deliver. Secondly, no alibis. You should prepare for an election. Don't wait until election day and you are telling us, Nigeria is a vast country and all of that. And young people go to the polling unit and they are waiting for the election materials. 12 o'clock, 10 o'clock, you can't find the election materials.
Yes, some people did not get to vote again.
So what will happen is that adequate preparation by the electoral umpire. Secondly, we must ensure that we have precise, publicized legal frameworks. You have to publish them. Educate the populace. What are the rules of the contest? Let's not be uncertain as what the rules are, because it appeared during the last year election that the rules were changed as the elections were happening. So take for instance, you say that where there's a discrepancy during collation, a resort will be made to the IRF. Remember the drama at the presidential collation center.
True.
Yes, and clearly, if you look at the guidelines, that's what the guidelines provided. So we must harmonize the Electoral Act also with the guidelines. The court should be consistent, Don't say one thing in one case and go to another
That
case
case
and say
something
another
else.
thing.
True.
The court should be
Consistency.
consistent because people begin to doubt the judicial process where there's inconsistency in decisions.
Yeah.
But there are several things, perhaps that will be for another discussion.
But fantastic point. And I'm even thinking we need another session to discuss electoral reforms, what we need to see changed. But when you talked about consistency, I think the court needs to understand that ordinarily they say the court is the hope of the ordinary man and ordinary woman. But it's problematic if people do not have that hope in the courts anymore. And not just because of elections. Yes. Beyond the elections, you already have people saying, it's only when you have the resources that you get cases in court. Some people spend years trying to get a judgment in court. And now with elections, it has worsened the trust deficits or deepen the lack of trust. And I think the court needs to start thinking around, being a bit more consistent and understanding that people want to look at them and feel hope. Yes. And so they need to represent that sense of hope. And I'll come to Ibrahim because you talked about Liberia and all the things that happened. There were some negatives, but there were lots of positives to celebrate. How can we rebuild trust in our elections, especially for young people?
I think like my village people say, all of you have spoken well. But I think just to add is that when the election empire, for instance, promises and does not deliver, what do you do after that? Is there accountability and transparency to say, these were the challenges, this is why we were not able to deliver, and these are the actions that we are taking to remedy this situation moving forward? I think that goes a long way to build trust, so you understand that an effort was made, either for a man-made or a technical reason you are not able to deliver. So that you come clean basically and say, we promised that IREV would deliver in near real time. It did not. These were the challenges that we faced.
Exactly.
This is what we're going to do moving forward.
They've not done that till date.
And they've not done that till date. So I think that that last step in starting to really rebuild trust as we approach the 2027 general elections. If you follow elections in Kenya, for instance, they tried to use technology and the first time it didn't really work. But subsequently, they were able to go back and say, how can we make it better to ensure that technology delivers? To speak on that point as well, we've seen how incremental uses of technology also helps to build trust. Yes. We belong to a generation where we trust technology so much, almost as if it cannot fail. But we also need to understand the level of literacy and our technological infrastructure and what can be used and what cannot be used. In Liberia, for instance, they had biometric voter registration, but they did not have any sort of biometric accreditation or biometric voting. So there's an incremental use of technology, and using a biometric voter register, they were able to weed out double registrants, and also at the back of the register put the names of those who had registered more than one. So you've seen how technology has helped to clean up the voters register to ensure that double registrants are not on the register. So I think for me, my main points around building trust is admitting where there are challenges. That's taking ownership. Where's the accountability and the transparency and the steps that are taken to remedy it? And then finally, the incremental use of technology in a way that ensures we can trust the process a lot more.
Accountability, transparency, and I'll just add to that communication, because all of these issues can also be resolved, maybe not be resolved, but addressed in a way that citizens begin to have trust if the commission is communicating with the people. And like you said, I think everyone has, let me follow Ibrahim's village people. You've all spoken well. You've all spoken well, honestly. We cannot lose faith. We cannot give up on elections. We cannot give up on democracy. We have to constantly work to rebuild it. And it's like a business venture. You may try once, it fails. It doesn't mean you will stop. You keep trying until you start making profits. And that's how I hope we would all see our electoral process, that we start seeing that like a business, that we are not getting the profits, the results we want to see now, but that subsequently with the work we do, if we keep making efforts, we will begin to see progress, and we begin to see the result that we want to see. Lady and gentlemen, it's been amazing having this conversation and with you guys, and I'm really thinking around bringing you back to discuss electoral reforms. What can we do? Learning from elections within the continent and also learning from the legal part. What can we advance, especially because this is an electoral reform circle. Whatever we can do, we need to do it now ahead of the next elections. But thank you so much, Chuang, my senior learned colleague. It's been a pleasure hosting you for the first time on the Unamplified Podcast. We'll be inviting you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our patron.
Third time on the show.
Third time on the show. That is not the end. You will still be coming. Thank you so much for always obliging us. And my co-host, I will leave it to you to shout out to our audience.
Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe to our channels. And of course, don't forget to leave your comments and thoughts on the reforms that you think the electoral system in Nigeria needs. Yes. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you. Drop a comment. What do you want to see changing, or what do you want to see changed or reformed in our electoral process? And to our crew behind the scene, we want to do a big shout out to our cinematographer, Coca, co-host. Who else do you want to shout out to?
Shout out to our director, Hamilton.
Yes.
Shout out to our producer, Drexx. Shout out to Austin behind the camera, to Ifeanyi. And of course, shout out to Ayo.
Yes, so
who's also
Ayo,
our social media handler.
Yes.
And
Queen CY. Shout out to Queen CY, Ifeanyi, Stephen and Samuel. And the cool one, we keep shouting out to you. Thank you. Keep a date with us every Wednesday as we bring you interesting content around issues that you care about. And like we always say, share, like, follow. And you know how we end the show. Everyone hold your very beautiful cup. We say, when you're on, you're amplified. And we cheers to Africa.